motivate behavior. So this something that we add is game elements, for example, time constraints or completion, or using leaderboards, or giving badges, or adding chance, lag, or giving kudos or tangible rewards, or having low stakes feedback loops, or a visual representation of progression, or adding a narrative that will encompass the learning task. But before we go further, I need to make a special warning. Because gamification is being used a lot of people think of gamification as just adding games. You bring games to the classroom and now you're gamifying your classroom. And we have to be very careful, because gamification is not the same thing as games. It will be just like going to a store and asking for a vegan apple, right? So an apple, it's already vegan, so you don't need to ask for a vegan apple. A game, it's already gamified, so you're not gamifying something by adding games. The idea is with gamification is that we are turning something that doesn't look like it, that it's not a game, into something that feels like a game. So again, something that is not a game into something that feels like a game. So again, is the use of game elements in non-game contexts to motivate the user, increase the user activity and retention, to foster instrumental goals. So a game has self-contained goals. When you finish playing a game, you're done. That's the end of the game. With gamification, those goals are outside the gamified system. So the theoretical underpinnings of gamification, the most famous one, is the self-determination theory, that is based on 3 basic human needs. So with gamification, if you're adding a sense of competence to the players, to the users, to the students, if you're adding a sense of autonomy, and if you're adding some kind of sense of relatedness, of feeling that they belong to a group, then you're tapping into those basic human needs. So the idea is that you're adding all those game elements to increase or to fulfill those 3 basic needs. Okay, so I've covered why we need strategy instruction, and I've covered why gamification can help us with strategy instruction. So now let me put the 2 of them together. So why gamify strategy instruction? There is a framework that has been proposed by Gunning, White, and Busquets in 2019, that in this framework, there are different steps. The first one is awareness raising. So the students are being made, we made them aware of the use of certain learning strategies, and then we explain those strategies and we model how to use them. And then there are 3-step practice. So first we do guided practice, and then we do independent practice, and then progression over time. And then a very important step is the reflection, and finally the autonomous use. So these 3 researchers, they came up with this framework, and they proposed it, and they've tested. And their conclusions is that the first 2 steps, having students to become aware of the learning strategies that they could use, and the explanation and the modeling of the use of those strategies, didn't create much of a problem. Now, when they ask students to follow up with the guided practice and then independent practice, there was a lot of variation between the students. And then the final step, the reflection, which is very important. Most teachers, they struggle with implementing this step, and sometimes they skip it. It was at the end, and they didn't feel very confident. So it was usually neglected. So then we think, well, what if we gamified this instruction framework? And we decided to add 4 game elements: the low stakes feedback loops, a sense of completion, adding a narrative around the tasks, and a visual representation of their progression. And I'm going to show to you how we did this. So for example, for the narrative, one of the sites where we did this research was in Spain. And at that time, this Geronimo Stilton family, it was very popular among the students. So we decided to use those books and create a narrative around that. So the students were asked to collect different pieces of budgets of the different family members of the family of Geronimo Stilton. So with that, looking at the framework, so if they were able to do the guided practice with the ears, so they were listening to the teacher and following the instructions, they were able to obtain the ears of this character. If they were able to do the independent practice, they will obtain the eyes of this character, and then finally the reflection. So the idea is that all the students were able to gather the 3 pieces. There was only one piece that was given depending on their performance, and I'll explain that. So just to explain a little bit more about this framework. So during the awareness raising, the teacher will present sorry, do you hear me? I see myself frozen. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. So at the beginning, the teacher will present a picture. You don't see it here, but there's a picture of a lady with an umbrella and say, what do you think the weather is like? And then the students will just say, well, it's raining. And how do you know that? Because the lady is holding an umbrella. So, and this is how the students were made aware of the use of inferencing, how to make intelligent guesses based on the clues that they see. There were 3 different strategies that were presented to the students. And then the guided practice where the teacher, through questioning, will guide the students through the use of the strategy, looking at the picture, looking at the title, looking at some of the words at the beginning. And then the students were able to make intelligent guesses for those words that they were struggling with. There we go. And then, okay. And then after the guided practice, in the independent practice, the students were given a text, and then they had to implement the strategy that that was modeled and guided before. They had to answer some questions. And what we did for these questions, we gave the game element that we implemented was the low stakes feedback loops. And we use a tool that the students were familiar with, Plickers. I don't know if some of you know them. The students, they just hold cards like you can see in the picture. And then you can see me with my phone. You scan the pictures and automatically, and it's super quick. You can get the answers automatically. It's like clickers, but the students don't need any electronic device because they just need to hold the card depending on the answer. And the cards are all different, so they cannot look at each other for, to cheat. So then with this, the students were able to see if they got the answers right by the use of their strategies. And then at the end, the reflection. And I believe, I'm not sure if I click, I don't think you, okay. So you might not hear, but I will, no, you cannot hear it, right? That's okay. Because it's, the student says, I read in present the words that come after, and then I ask, and what's the word that comes after gazing? And she says, up at the Milky Way. And then I say, okay, and how, so what did you imagine in your head? So then the student went ahead and tried to imagine, well, if it's up and the Milky Way, and the student knows what the Milky Way is, then she was able to inference the meaning of the word gazing, that she was not, that was the first time that she encountered that word. So that was how the students did that final step with the reflection. And if they were able to provide good examples of the reflection, they were given rings, like you can see in there. that were surrounding the budgets. So depending on the 3 steps of the process of the framework, they had the 3 pieces of the badge, and then the ring was for the reflection. So by using this, we had low stakes feedback loops because they were, the answers were anonymous. And they were able just to check if they had the right answer or not. They had to complete those badges. There was a narrative, as a big framing the activity that we did, and they were able to see a visual progression of their own learning. And this is our way of moving from auto-regulation to self-regulation by gamifying the strategy instruction by using those 4 game elements. And these are some of the conclusions that or the results that we've gathered. We were able to see a higher level of engagement. Something that was key is that the students with lower proficiency levels were very engaged in that, in the process, in the discussions and in the activities, but also the teacher. The teacher had a very structured process to follow, and that also seemed to motivate her a lot. And also more saliency of the reflection. That was a step that was neglected before. We were able to observe that this step was maintained, done, and well developed in all the lessons that we observed. In not so positive results, we don't know if, with gamification, a big question is if any gamification system can go beyond the novelty effect, something that it's new, it's motivated, but once it's not new anymore if it's still motivating. So we need to research a bit more about that. Also, if the students will be able to transfer the use of the strategies outside this gamified system, and also if the use of those strategies really translate into a higher level of reading proficiency. So those are the things that we are not so certain in this research, and we have to keep doing research about. And also in terms of methodology, we also have some questions about which game elements we need to include. We selected those 4, but are other group of game elements that might be more efficient or not. Also, can we use data that it's not relying on self-reporting data of the strategy used, and if those students can show progression outside the gamified system. So those are questions that we hope that we will keep exploring, and maybe, next year in this conference again, we can present to you further results in our research. And with that, I forgot to say anything about the chat. If you want to ask questions, I'm going to write down my email address, but I think I need to pass the mic to the next person presenting. Is that it? Catherine, do I have 2 minutes for one burning question, or do I move on?
No, your time is up, Teresa. Thank you very much. Excellent. So yes, if you could put your contact information in the chat, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Perfect. Our next presenter is presenting the topic called Supporting Self-Regulated Learning in Undergraduate Courses. And her name is Sylvia Massabel from the University of British Columbia. Welcome.
Thank you. And I am not enabled to share my screen.
You're not able to share your screen.
No.
Check here. Let me see. Try to. I'm going to ask you to try again in just a moment. Can you try again now, please, Celia?
Oh. Yeah, now I can.
Okay, so I'll set the clock for 18 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for joining. I'm joining you from the West Coast, so good morning to those that are here. And I'm a doctoral candidate in the Faculty of Education at UBC, and I'm sharing today my dissertation work titled Supporting Self-Regulated Learning in Undergraduate Courses. So quite related to the other regulation to self-regulation that Teresa was just talking about. So what's the issue? Highly qualified and diverse students are admitted to universities, and there they're expected to engage in strategic, proactive, and adaptive approaches to learning so they can apply what they learn in flexible and transformative ways. So this is to develop adaptive expertise. But there are individual and contextual factors that challenge learners to navigate these expectations. So at the individual level, many students are not well equipped to take control over their learning. For example, they use ineffective learning strategies or bring factors like specific learning disabilities, language barriers, or mental health challenges that can influence their learning. And at the contextual level, instructional practices like traditional lecturing and structures like outcome-focused evaluations limit student active engagement in learning. And so the combination of these challenges might result in students who don't engage in meaningful learning or are underachieving. But universities have a range of academic supports in place to support their students. And through these, they learn useful general learning skills like these strategies that Teresa was talking about in the post-secondary context. And through them, they solve pressing academic issues. But the reality is that these supports don't really empower students to tailor their learning skills, the ones that they learn, to subject matter courses. And the reason for that is that they're unrelated to the courses, so outside of the subject matter. Research suggests that supplementing academic supports with classroom-based supports is effective, but so far, studies involving instructors in translating student-centered pedagogies like self-regulated learning to their teaching remains understudied. So with this in mind, my study had two purposes. The first one was to document how a group of university instructors translated self-regulated learning principles and practices to their teaching, which I addressed through my first research question. And the second purpose was to probe their perspectives on bringing supports for SRL to their courses. So particularly on the influence these supports had on participation and performance, and also on the factors affording and constraining their efforts at bringing their supports to classrooms. I addressed this purpose through my second research question. Did it not load? No? Okay, so how did I conceptualize self-regulated learning? It refers to deliberate and goal-directed engagement in the context of learning activities.
Sylvia?
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we can't see your screen.
Oh, not any longer?
No.
You haven't seen it at all? Oh, gosh. Sorry about that. Let me see where things went. Am I sharing now?
Yes.
And what are you seeing?
We're seeing slide 2. Okay.
Okay, so let's start. I won't say everything again. I'll just let you see that. Okay, so I'll just go through this. Sorry about that. Are you seeing it now? Yes? Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we see. Thank you.
Okay, so we're here. So SRL, again, what that is. And so it, I'm just gonna move this here. Okay, so it refers to deliberate and goal-directed engagement in the context of learning activities. And so for learners to act strategically in the context of learning, they must integrate motivational, emotional, and metacognitive processes. So from the learner's point of view, engaging in SRL is a way of working through activities in order to learn. And so it includes things learners do before, during, and after learning tasks. And models of SRL emphasize that educators can empower learners to navigate learning through the quality of instruction, interpersonal interactions, and learning tasks. And importantly, as Teresa mentioned, SRL and SRL supportive practices are linked to improved academic achievement and well-being across educational levels, but instructors' involvement in the development of those of practices and their implementation is crucial. So what did I do in my study? I used a multiple case study design with the participatory approach to address my research questions. This figure represents the 5 cases. So the unit of analysis was each instructor's teaching practice, here in green, as it occurred in its natural setting, an undergraduate course marked with the dashed lines. The way students took up the opportunities to engage in SRL informed instructors' teaching practice, and that's here in red. So the instructors that participated in my study belonged to the Faculty of Science at a Canadian research university and had between 2 and 8 years of university teaching experience. And the courses they taught in the context of this research included all levels of undergrad instruction across different disciplines. Instructors and I partnered for 10 months to form a community of inquiry where we could build on each other's knowledge and experience about designing and implementing SRL supportive practices. And at the core of this collaborative and participatory approach was the idea that we were co-learners in the process. So how did this happen? We engaged in situated, iterative, and strategic inquiry processes focused on teaching for SRL. And so this figure represents our processes together. So here you see what happened for us as a community of inquiry. We met 5 times over the course of the study and used guiding questions to organize our time together. And in each meeting, I shared SRL theory and research based on topics that instructors wanted to explore, and the instructors shared their experience of translating the theory to the practice. In the inner layer, you see the individual cycles of inquiry that instructors went through as they engaged in the study. I documented 3 of those cycles, but they went through more of them in our time together. Individual inquiry then informed our shared inquiry and vice versa. I collected records of instructors' plans, actions, and reflections, course documents like syllabi and activities. I observed their teaching twice, had multiple brief interviews and an in-depth interview with each of them at the end of the study. And I also collected student data, but did not include it in today's presentation. My data was analyzed in 2 phases. So during the study to inform our inquiry processes, and at the end of the study using typical qualitative and case study analysis methods. And I relied on multiple methods to ensure trustworthiness of my study. So what did I find? In relation to the first question that asked how instructors had infused opportunities for SRL in their courses, I found that despite differences in subject matter, instructors brought elaborate combinations of supportive practices to their courses, but their implementation varied according to the course level, structure, and class size. So overall, instructors created safe and supportive learning environments with clear routines and expectations set through the syllabus and maintained through the learning management system and in class. And all classes really seemed like small lab sessions due to the high levels of interaction, for example, through Think, Pair, Share activities or whole class guided discussions. Activities had multiple instructional goals that focused on different processes of strategic action. So for example, task understanding and monitoring. And instructors supported students through individual and social learning, modeling and guided practice, and encouraging dialogue about learning processes. So that was general to all courses. However, I said that some practices were shaped differently depending on the course level, course structure, and class size. So for example, in introductory intermediate courses, activities were short-lived and standalone, and instructors offered limited opportunities for students to make choices relevant to their learning. Whereas in the advanced course, SRL activities were embedded throughout the course and meaningful for students, and the instructors offered multiple decision-making opportunities, provided lots of formative feedback, not only in verbal form during class, but also written, and engaged students in iterative self-evaluation about their work in progress. And as I said, they combined teaching practices to support the different components of SRL. For example, in an in-class activity in an introductory course, students reflected on the midterm and how they had prepared for it. The instructors used clickers and followed up with questions and short whole class discussions. So a clicker statement that read, "I want to change how I prepare and participate in lecture," sought to engage students in motivational processes because it invited them to think that they were in control of their study habits and performance. And follow-up metacognitive questions like, what does it mean to study? Or what's something you could do differently, referring to how they had prepared, sought to foster their metacognitive knowledge and strategic action. So through these questions, students were invited to think about their understanding of the tasks of studying and exam taking, and learn from one another about specific exam preparation strategies. And then these questions also sent a motivational message by linking success and learning to effort and use of strategies, and inviting students to make choices about how they improve their performance. And importantly, this reflection was meaningful because students had a second midterm. In relation to the second research question that probe instructors' perceptions about supporting SRL, I found that they perceived an increase in quantity or an improvement in the quality of participation and performance indicators. And this was based on their observations during the term and comparisons to other cohorts. So for example, in terms of participation, they noticed that student attendance was higher, that the quality of participation in and out of class was better, and peer support offered on the web platform was more informative. In terms of performance, instructors observed better quality assignments, grades were higher, and some students started to demonstrate in assignments and exams expert-like skills, like knowing when a product is good enough, or how to fix mistakes and how to analyze problems. But instructors also perceived that factors at the system, student, and personal level both afforded and constrained their efforts at bringing supports for SRL. For example, at the system level, having supportive colleagues and advanced small courses where instructors could decide how to evaluate students or could use technology in creative ways to support learning were perceived as affording. And having limited class time relative to the content to be covered, short academic terms, and having imposed evaluation structures were perceived as constraining. At the student level, instructors perceived that when students were open to adapting their strategies to fit the learning context, it was encouraging for them to bring supports, but that students' lack of awareness about needing these new strategies or resistance to them when they were showing or modeling them to them was perceived as a barrier. At the personal level, instructors' feelings of competence about self-regulated learning, so knowing about it, being involved in scholarship of teaching and learning initiatives, and believing that they're responsible for teaching students how to learn and that they can make a difference, were perceived as affording. So what can we conclude and why does it matter? First, involving instructors in translating theory to practice was productive. They offered useful insights about bringing pedagogical innovations to undergraduate courses that could inform course design as well as departmental, faculty, or institutional teaching and learning initiatives. Second, this study supports the idea that there is no recipe to supporting SRL in undergraduate courses, but rather the context must be considered when tailoring SRL principles and practices to teaching. Third, the practices implemented aligned with discipline-based effective teaching practices, leading to improvements in participation and performance, but it would be interesting to explore whether these practices take a similar shape and have the same influence in other academic fields. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that in the next presentation, as well as learning from students about how these practices enhance their self-regulated learning skills. Fourth, increase familiarity with the pedagogical framework. In addition to a situated inquiry approach to teaching, bridge the research to practice divide for this group of instructors. And it engaged them, it's important because it engaged them in reflexive teaching and empowered them to make informed teaching decisions in future course offerings. Lastly, having a group of like-minded individuals to explore their teaching practice was perceived as productive, validating, and transformative for this group of instructors. So using a community of inquiry model could be useful in continued professional development and pedagogical training initiatives. So this research, of course, could be extended with more cases as well as mixed methodologies to address some of the inherent limitations that are part of the design that I used. And this brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm sorry you couldn't see the first slides. I have a list of references that I'm happy to share, and I wonder if you have any questions or comments. I can't see the chat here. I'm going to end the slideshow.
I'm looking at the chat, Sylvia, and I don't see any questions coming up right now.
Okay, so we can leave it there. I'm happy to.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. Excellent presentation from Sylvia and also from Teresa. There's a third part now. The third presentation is called The SRL Paradox, How Instructor Presence Fosters Self-Regulated Learning. And the authors on this include Leila Ferreira from the University of British Columbia, Jennifer Walsh-Marr from the University of British Columbia. We have Catherine Lyon, also from the University of British Columbia, Sylvia Massabel from the University of British Columbia, Jeff McIver from the University of British Columbia, and George Rieger from the University of British Columbia. So thank you, and I'll turn the mic over to, I believe there's 3 speakers who are going to be presenting in this last segment.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. And our presentation will sort of just show some of the adaptations and the incorporations of self-regulated learning that Sylvia referred to. I'm coming to you from Vancouver in the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. So the paper we share, we're sharing today, is how, oops, hang on. How 3 instructors of undergraduate UBC disciplines, academic writing, physics, and sociology, innovated our teaching using self-regulated learning supportive practices. We will call these practices SRL-SP throughout today's paper. Each of us will detail how we used SRL-SP before and after the move to online teaching and learning. We will share specific examples that demonstrate how SRL-SP were tailored to meet student needs and instructors' learning objectives in undergraduate courses within these academic disciplines. The origins of the work we are presenting comes from a recently completed teaching and learning enhancement project in which faculty from across campus introduced self-regulated learning supports in their undergraduate courses to enhance students' ability to take ownership of their learning. This project was a partnership between the UBC faculties of arts, science, education, and CTLT, and all of us were supported by Sylvia. As our colleague Sylvia has already explained in detail, SRL refers to, or self-regulated learning refers to deliberate engagement in learning activities and is displayed by learners taking ownership of their learning and working with ideas in adaptive and transformative ways. This table here reviews some instructional supports to enhance student metacognition and their agency in the learning process. Each of us adapted some of these practices to fit our instructional goals and meet the needs of our students. Ultimately, we will illustrate the potential of self-regulated learning supportive practices in providing instructors with a dynamic and situated pedagogical framework necessary to work with a diverse student body in an online environment as both instructors and students grapple with limited face-to-face interactions and an increased emphasis on students' independent management of their learning. So to begin, Jennifer Walsh-Marr and I will speak to the self-regulated learning supportive practices we incorporated into our writing and language development courses in Vantage College at UBC that are designed specifically for international English as an additional language students.
Thank you. Sorry, I just did the screen thing. So Leila and I worked together in 2019 and 2020 on SRL-SP in our respective courses and continued to collaborate through the shift to online learning. This included revisiting and redeploying how we broke major assignments into smaller components, incorporated peer review, explored new technological platforms to facilitate collaborative writing, and social annotation, and used reflective tasks to facilitate students' metacognition of their expectations, successes, and challenges. Further, we were really conscientious in the design of our learning management system, course interface of our courses, and consistent messaging to students, reiterating priorities and encouragement. Pre-pandemic, our goal in incorporating SRL was to incorporate student development of their own agency in the processes of learning. This included staging assignments into components with opportunities for revision, distribution of assessment criteria in introducing assignments, making explicit connections between lecture content, assignment specifications, and assessment criteria, peer review so that learning was collaborative and responsive, and reflection so that students developed reflective and intentional strategies at each stage. The data gathered from surveys indicate a significant increase in Vantage's students' confidence and preparedness in both of our courses with academic language and writing. In the context of COVID, we redoubled our efforts so as to facilitate students' transition to first year via remote learning. Both of us engaged in design thinking to ensure coherence of plans and alignment of course goals to activities. A major component of this design thinking was to prioritize helping students develop their identity as university students in the remote teaching and learning context.
We will now review some examples of how we deepened our SRL SP through remote instruction. Both of us designed our courses to be taught in a mostly asynchronous format due to time zone issues. This meant pre-recording lecture videos for students to watch and repeat as needed. We built student groups with whom they had to collaborate, opportunities for peer review, as well as individual tasks for personal accountability. The scaffolding of learning and the steps needed to achieve the expectations of scholarly writing and language was intensified. For example, we layered the development of each assignment and project from the early planning stages through its execution and reflection after its completion. Mastery of course concepts was facilitated with low stakes quizzes, discussion boards, and using an online social annotation tool to highlight features of course text covered in lectures. We also incorporated synchronous small group work on Etherpad, a FIPPA compliant open source version of Google Docs for text deconstruction and joint reconstruction of specific text types in preparation for individual writing tasks in a sort of real-time engagement that we could also watch as the students completed their tasks.
We used FIPPA compliant social annotation tools similar to Hypothesis for students to annotate course texts, to respond to one another's annotations, and to expand, question, and further analyze the concepts and findings in the article they were annotating. Peer review was incorporated with lessons, lectures, and practice, both in small group discussion formats and more formal processes where students compare and provide feedback on their peers' assignments. Further to the SRL principle of ownership of learning, in January, we asked students to take stock of their skills and intentions. This created an artifact that students then reflected on in April to take stock again and recognize their challenges and successes. Improvement students noted were their comfort in collaborating and confidence in sharing their work with one another, and the professional ways in which they made final presentations and questions of one another. There was a huge growth in the ownership and pride in their research projects and in their writing, and evidence in their discussion forum contributions and peer feedback on one another's assignments. It's now my pleasure to introduce our colleague, Catherine Lyon from Sociology at UBC and Vantage College.
Thanks very much. I teach sociology with first-year international students, and many of them are from diverse institutional cultures of learning. And I found that many of these students have been taught in high school to see knowledge as discrete bits of information to be memorized. And this emphasis on memorization and learning as a one-way process doesn't align with the learning goals of my discipline of sociology. So my goal is instead to guide students in engaging with course concepts as lenses for seeing the world to take up in their day-to-day lives. In other words, to apply concepts and draw connections between them through deep learning rather than surface learning. So my SRL intervention was to support students in interpreting and engaging with lecture content in critical ways in real time. To do so, I created worksheets with prompts for structured reflection throughout each lecture. And my goal here was to take up, in particular, the modeling and questioning components of SRL that Layla mentioned earlier. The worksheets I designed model how to think about sociology rather than what to think about sociology. So what do we actually do? Every 10 minutes in lecture, the class paused and students would respond in writing to the next sequential reflection prompt. Each prompt elicits a different thinking process in relation to the material that was just presented in like a bite-sized chunk. In the sample reflection prompts that are shown here on the slide, sorry, not the next slide yet. Thank you. Under sample reflection prompts, perfect. The first prompt supports interpretation and paraphrasing. The second prompt supports application and evaluation. And the third prompt asks students to relate this new material to previous course concepts. And then students hand in their worksheets at the end of each class and they get feedback. Preliminary findings from a pre and post-class survey of students indicate small gains in students' belief in their ability to succeed in the course, including in their confidence applying course concepts and taking notes during lecture. Okay, next slide, thank you. So in the transition to remote teaching under COVID, I found that opportunities for guided lecture reflection actually expanded. So during synchronous lectures, I was able to reproduce the structured lecture questions through interactive programs like Top Hat. And for asynchronous lectures, which I also incorporated, I embedded open-ended pop-up questions throughout the lectures through Kaltura, which was supported by my university. You can see a sample pop-up question in the slide here. So just like the worksheets, these questions help students identify key information from the last 10 minutes and immediately reflect on or apply it. By the end of the term, I asked students to come up with some of their own lecture response questions, hopefully signaling a shift in their ability to identify and deconstruct lecture content and structure. Looking forward, I actually intend to bridge online and face-to-face lecture reflection through both paper worksheets and online software at various points throughout each week of the course. So that's what I did in sociology. And I'd now like to introduce Professor George Rieger, who implemented SRL within his teaching in the Department of Physics and Astronomy.
Thank you, Catherine. So we implemented SRL supportive practices in a large first-year physics course on electricity and magnetism. And this course is a highly interactive course using also worksheets and clickers. And in general, this works relatively well, but we noticed that a fraction of students did not really get started, let's say, on some of the problem questions on worksheets, and they seemed to wait just for us to present the solution. And we were wondering what the reason might be, and through interaction with the SRL team, we focused then on task interpretation, which is one of the first things that students should be doing. So what we then did is we put additional prompts and hints on the worksheets and offered verbal encouragement to the students to write everything down that seems relevant. So we asked them to use the space on the worksheets and write very close to the questions, whatever comes to their head, which might be relevant, such as equations or situations or drawings. And so they should really do messy solutions to have something to look at that can be evaluated and discussed. And when we did this in class and we discussed the solutions, hang on, previous slide, please. Yeah, we offered the attitude that we value all ideas and contributions. We wanted to model inclusivity. No idea was dismissed as incorrect. We rather adopted what we call a resources model. So in other words, whatever the students think about in this context is not correct or incorrect. It just have to be put together in a correct way. And so how to combine things constructively, including resources from the textbook, let's say, was the focus of our study. And so as instructor, we modeled then at the end a doubles checking, sense making, and putting these resources together. Next, please. And so the particular emphasis on that led to students perceiving the class instruction as non-judgmental. So the move from this is correct or incorrect to the move of this is a good idea that we want to put together helped with perceiving the class as non-judgmental. The constant promise to use the worksheet space to write something led to significantly more writing on the worksheets. And this also translated to the midterm exams. So we were just able to do the midterm before COVID. We unfortunately no in-person exams during the final exam, but on the midterm, we saw significantly more, about 1/3 more of writing on the midterm exam booklets. And so there's an example at the bottom here. On the right-hand side, you see an example from a student in the SRL focused section who annotated this question with little arrows that show relevant directions and also some equations that may be relevant to answer this question as well. And on the left-hand side was the other course section. So the course had 2 course sections that did not have the SRL focus, but shared otherwise the exact same course resources. And there you see that the student tried to guess or reason through this multiple choice question without putting anything down. And that is something we often see, that students, when confronted with a multiple choice question in particular, just stare at the screen and think that all the information may be on the screen instead of going inwards and think about what they already know. And the other good thing is that there may be a performance increase due to this that we currently test for level of significance. So there's a small difference in grade. Whether it's significant or not needs to be tested statistically. Okay, next slide, please. So we wanted to maintain this SRL focus during COVID. And this is what my colleague Jess McIver did. So she just, this was in a synchronous online course. And so on the first day, she emphasized the importance of writing and sketching when confronted with interactive problems. Students were instructed to grab something to write with at the start of each class, and the instructor modeled this during the feedback and follow-up part. And finally, students were even on the quizzes and online tests encouraged to start by writing down what you know. Okay, so this is the physics example.
Well, thank you, George. So throughout all of our presentations, we have shown how discipline-specific incorporations of SRL-SP are complemented with our shared findings on how innovating with these supportive practices led to shifts in our teaching practice and student learning. There were shared shifts in our teaching practice and perspectives in terms of more intentional teaching, our focus on process and active learning and student strategy development that led to more inclusive classrooms and better instructor understanding of student strengths and challenges. We observed shifts in student learning, such as enhanced awareness about themselves as learners in relation to tasks and the learning context, increased willingness to make choices, to experiment and explore, better prediction and understanding of expectations, and enhanced awareness about others as learners in relation to collaborative tasks. Interestingly, we found that the online context provided more opportunities for incorporating self-regulated learning supportive practices into our classes, that we plan on continuing at different formats in face-to-face and hybrid teaching situations. And that might even be like recording lectures and social annotations. We ultimately conclude that with what we describe as the SRL paradox, self-regulated learning is not an individual process. It is inherently social. It is not a trait and can be learned and taught. And in fostering student self-regulation and independence, classroom-wide supports for SRL require a more intentional instructor presence in planning and thinking through course design and being accessible in guiding students to adopt SRL strategies. Thank you. And yeah, any questions, of course, turn on your mics and in the chat.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, so let's see if there's any questions coming in the chat.
Hi, how long would you say it added for the prof? How much work, extra work was it for the prof? Not sure how to phrase it in a more positive light.
I'll jump in quickly and then let my other colleagues do. There was more work at the outset of the thinking and the planning, and then there was less after the fact. There was less mopping up. There was less, but I meant this. Because we shared things early, we can point back. There was that deeper design thinking, the iteration, the sharing of assessment strategies early on, the scaffolding. They got a better sense of we meant what we said and this is how it works, and then get that investment of trust, the iterative task. Like my course was 2 semesters, so in January it was like, right, you know how this works, let's go. And so there was the deeper thinking and the planning at the outset, but after the fact much less. For in my situation, I can't speak for everyone.
No, I would absolutely agree. I already do a lot of extra thinking in terms of accessible design as well. And so it's like, you have to spend more time setting up the structure. I actually spent way more time this term having scheduled meetings with my students where they brought in how their project was developing, but that lessened the workload. So it seems like, oh, I'm more involved and spending more time in terms of design, but in handing the learning over to them at some point, they take it up. And so the teaching load is lessened in that way. I see George nodding. So George, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think for us, it was mainly really awareness. So going through the worksheet question before, let's say, the next session is something that I do anyway. And just adding a little prompt here and there where I thought, oh, this could help the students get started, was really relatively straightforward to do. And then it was just remembering to really constantly tell the students, well, think about what you have learned before. Write things down on the worksheet. That cost us nothing really, and I would say the results were pretty good for that.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Could I just add somebody asked, and somebody asks about how online offered more opportunities for SRL. And Jennifer was saying, one of the things was that students could go back and keep on referring to lectures and instructions. Also, I found I could scaffold in ways I couldn't. I hadn't realized ways that I could use online tools for scaffolding, and my scaffolding was so detailed and structured, and what they produced in the end was so phenomenal through that scaffolding. I would say that being able to incorporate like social annotation tools, and I know that Catherine, you included more online tools as well that we hope to also use now as we move into the face-to-face format, but just so many more opportunities for scaffolding.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. That was a great hour. And I encourage you to return to the schedule page of the conference platform so that you can find the next session you hope to attend. Thank you again to everyone who spoke today.